Hello and welcome to this extra special edition of the Next Fan Up podcast, everybody. My name is Jay Soderberg. Pod Vader is going to take a break today. Not that he can't be involved in this conversation, but I just feel that the tone is not appropriate for Pod Vader to be involved with, even though Jay Soderberg and Pod Vader are the same person. Trust me, it's weird, I know. But today I am here as Jay Soderberg, and we have a very important conversation today about the social injustices that are happening in America, and how do we get beyond what is happening? How that's not the way to say it either. How do we heal? How do we come together in times like this? And our Eagles fan, James, is here with us, and James is going to introduce us to a friend of his. James, hello.
Hey, Jay. So today we're going to be talking with Joy Stevens. She is a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist inside corporate America and a board-certified life coach with New Heights Management. And she will be giving us some insight from her professional perspective and expertise as to how we got here. So there will be some histrionics, if you will, as far as some of the past events in our nation and how they relate to present day and what's still going on, and how some things have changed and that we've learned from, and how some things haven't changed because we haven't learned, and how we can affect change going forward. And it is a very in-depth conversation, more so than any monologue that I've given in the past, because you will hear our perspectives, both Jay and myself, in this conversation, and just have an open mind and be receptive of what's being said. And if you still have questions or concerns, there's always research. We have Google and the internet. You can always look things up to validate through factual websites. Not everything on the internet is true, but you can find the truth if you're willing to look, listen, and learn.
I think that's very poignant. This episode is going to be presented with limited commercials. And so coming up in just a minute, we're going to bring in our special guest. It's my pleasure now to bring in our guest. She is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, as well as a corporation culture consultant for the New Heights consulting company. It is Joy Stevens. Hello, Joy. Welcome to the Next Fan Up podcast.
Hello, Jay. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm super happy to have you, and I'm super glad that you are able to come in and join us on this special occasion. Let's talk a little bit about corporations, because before we started, I made the comment, corporations suck, don't they? And I think you made a very interesting point about corporations.
Yeah. So, we joke around that, corporations are people too, but they do at a macro level tend to have some of the same vagaries that a human would have. There's some companies that in this current climate, they don't want to talk about it. They'd rather just, keep soldiering on. There's some companies that are interested and want to know more, and they want to, have more information for their people. There's some that are like in the middle, where they may do something performative, to put up a banner on their website for the month of June, or, mention something, but not really do any action beyond that. And I see the same thing with individuals. There's people that want to talk about what's happening, people that don't want to talk about what's happening, and then those that are kind of, I'd say, dip their toe into the fray. So yeah, I think corporations, they're not all big evil conglomerates like Umbrella Corp or something like that. There are absolutely groups that want to help change the world, even if it's just a vacuum company or a tech company. They want to do their part. And so I'm encouraged by that.
We talked offline a couple of days ago about, a lot of the ongoings with the league, probably on a more larger scale, especially with the uncomfortable conversations with a black man. And I'm just going to jump straight into that part right here with Emmanuel Acho, former linebacker of the NFL, who sat down and had a conversation with Roger Goodell. And we've talked about it here on this podcast, more so in our Slack channel than on air. And I wanted to go a little bit more in depth, especially with you, about that, as far as what your thoughts were on it compared to some of the other renditions of what Acho has done as far as sitting down with other people compared to Roger Goodell. And I don't want to use that in a vacuum, but one of the things that we say as far as allyship, and I know that's something that you talk big on, especially with the corporations you speak with, is how to be an ally. And sometimes having these conversations, the person who is being talked to be an ally at times is going to be made to feel uncomfortable. Did you get that in any way watching the interview the sit down between Goodell and Acho?
That's a good question. I saw both parts of that interview, and it seemed to me as if it was an olive branch to Roger Goodell, let's give you a chance to clean up some of the stuff that you've done. But I will say this, I do know that people can change. Now, you cannot change people, but people can want to change on their own. People can want to get new information. They can want to see things a different way, but you can't force it. So I thought this was very much a training wheels on type of interview. He could have hit harder, but at the same time, I'm glad he didn't, because there are a lot of people that are going to watch what he did with Roger Goodell and make their decision of whether or not to get off the bench dependent on how he treated Roger. So when you're trying to build new allies, the old Southern phrase is you get more flies with honey than vinegar. You don't want to alienate him early on, because it'll discourage other people from wanting to take that same step. So I understand the soft pedaling of some of the questions, but I also think it was a good chance for Goodell. He could have, again, people have to want to change. He could have come out and said, I really, didn't see this. I really messed up. We didn't treat Kaepernick right. All of that could have been stated more strongly. I think he skirted around a couple of things. Like one of the things that he said that struck me was, we never punished anyone for taking a knee. And I'm like, there's a whole Colin Kaepernick sitting in his house somewhere. How could you say that? But I also understood that there's commission stuff and there's team stuff. So I get that. But right now, okay, so you have to understand there's a difference between saying individually, I'm not racist, and being anti-racist. It's like saying, I don't kick puppies, but then watching a puppy be kicked and say, well, I'm not doing it, and that's good enough. You should stop somebody from kicking the puppy, even if it's not you. And so that's the difference between saying you're not racist and being anti-racist. And I think Roger Goodell was at a point where he's like, I'm not racist, and I don't think he is. But to be anti-racist is to speak up as an ally when you see something that you know is improper or inappropriate or unfair, and speak out against it. That's not cool. That's not right. We shouldn't do that. I heard some of that in his language towards the second interview. So, yeah, I think it was as good as it could be. And if they had gone any harder and really made Roger Goodell uncomfortable, I think it would have potentially alienated some of those middle-of-the-road fans that were watching that and thinking, how can I, start taking baby steps forward? You don't want to scare anybody off, so to speak.
Well, I started with this because, and I'm pretty sure you've seen it by now, the video that several of the young NFL players did, including Patrick Mahomes, who most recently won the Super Bowl earlier this year in February and was named Super Bowl MVP, youngest player to do so, a year after winning league MVP, again, youngest player to do so at the time. And he, along with Ezekiel Elliott and Deshaun Watson and a lot of other young African-American stars in this league who are rapidly becoming the faces of their franchise, and Mahomes now arguably probably one of the faces of the league, if you will, putting the statement out as far as their call for the NFL to do more, to be active in social justice, social reform, listening to the players more about this. And I can't remember all of the players. Those three stand out because those are the biggest names, I believe. What's his name? Honey Badger. which I'm drawing a blank on, was in there as well. Tyrann Mathieu, thank you. And Goodell's immediate response. And even though we haven't heard directly from any NFL team owner since then, Goodell coming out and responding to it, I feel like was the proper first step as far as getting the ball rolling. What would you say to NFL owners as far as those who might want to do more or just comfortable just doing what they can, probably not drawing attention to themselves?
To the NFL owners, I would say don't be last. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So there's this concept, and actually there's a cute little TED Talk about this. It's maybe like 4 minutes long, about being the first follower. And the subject of that talk is anyone can be a leader, but if you're the first one to do something and you're doing something all by yourself, people may think that you're crazy. You're a lone nut out there by yourself. But the first person to follow you and do what you're doing opens the floodgates and make it okay for everyone else to maybe join in what is going on. This new movement is created not by the leader, but by the first follower. And ultimately, towards the end of the momentum, if you will, now you're weird if you're not doing what everyone else is doing. And so many people are now doing this new thing that if you're still holding on to the old thing, you are now the outcast or the one that is different from the group. And so it encourages you more and more. But people notice who's last. Why aren't you up? Everybody else is up. Get up. Come with us. And so I would say don't be last. Be that first follower, because that is the most courageous position. And I think Goodell did very good there being that first follower. The NFL players have put out something. I'm going to put out something too to show support and also hopefully open the floodgates of team owners, other officials in the NFL stepping forward and saying, this is how we want to be and this is what we want to represent. So, yeah, I'd say don't be last on that train.
Joy, you having been in both areas and being a corporate consultant, understanding sort of the business side and sort of the business motivations towards why corporations or owners decide to go in one particular direction, and then also understanding the social impact and the impact one can have by becoming one of the first followers. And there's obviously a place where both of those can meet. If we go back a little bit in time and sort of remember when Colin Kaepernick first took a knee, because I remember we on this podcast made a very strong stance of our support for Colin Kaepernick and his right to take a knee when he did and how he decided to protest what was going on in America at that particular point. It's still going on in America now and seems to have finally reached that boiling over point. How do you consult the business to become that first follower, understanding that they got to get past the fear of, well, if I do this, it's going to have a negative impact on my sales. It's going to have a negative impact on my bottom line.
Okay, so what you just said is at the root of so many things. I can take that statement all the way back to slavery, to the 1619 Project, if you're familiar with that, to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in D.C. It struck me to my heart and it stayed with me when I visited that museum. And by the way, if you go to that museum, spend 2 days, you cannot get it done in a day. But I remember going through a journal, or there was a journal entry they had preserved from a ship owner. And of course, it was a slave ship or involved in the slave trade. And he specifically said, the sounds and the smells from below decks are almost more than I can bear, but the money is too good. And that stuck with me because that is what I continue to see even to this day. Yes, we are no longer beaten and forced to do work, but at the same time, the idea of treating someone fairly, treating someone equally, doing the right thing can sometimes be diametrically opposed to profit. And so at what point do you say, I don't want to make my money like this? And that can sometimes be a very emotionally charged, hard decision for someone to make. I don't want to lose profits over this. And yeah, if you make a stance specifically in this climate, specifically given the history of the constituency of the NFL, you make the stance, you alienate some diehard fans, but you're going to lose some season ticket holders. But do you want to do the right thing? And are you going to starve if you do it? I mean, there is a level of cushion here that we need to be aware of, you know. So I think that's something that people have to wrestle with. I do the same thing in corporations. You know, we talk about pay equity. Again, I am a Black female. So I know, because there's plenty of research out there, that for any particular job, I could be paid as little as 54% of what a white male could make. If I were a white woman, it would be 66%, but it still ain't 100%, right? So to close that pay gap, either they're going to have to stop giving raises to the white male counterparts, or they're going to have to increase my pay by upwards of 40%. That hits the bottom line. That becomes a different conversation. Again, when you talk about performances, oh, we put up a banner that says Black Lives Matter, oh, we put up something for Women's Month, we recognize XYZ. Well, how about paying me more? Whoa. You know, all of a sudden, things get different, and that's something people have to wrestle with. And it's a personal decision, but it speaks to the character of a company, the character of a corporation, and the character of a country. Do you want to profit off of suffering? And that's something that everybody has to deal with.
Specifically with the NFL, where they're not necessarily, well, in a way they are profiting off of suffering with collisions of young men, but specifically with the NFL, where they made this, I mean, I don't know if it was really an official edict, but it was clearly one that was presented as such, where they came out against the kneeling during the national anthem. If there was a first follower in this particular instance that would have allowed their teams to protest how they felt at what time that they felt, during that particular time, it now seems that edict has been lifted. How, I mean, talk about the differences there and sort of like the struggles that company has to face, or that owner had to face during that time, where the from on high, it comes down that your team cannot basically protest in this manner. And that team decides, no, we're going to ignore that against all the wishes of the commissioner and move forward with what we feel is right.
I think, it would have been extremely brave. It would have gone down in history if they had done that. And I also think that I'd say financial repercussions would have been short-lived. I mean, who knew at the time that right now we'd be, you know, sitting at home wondering if, you know, if we're really going to have a season, how are we going to do this, et cetera. No one could foresee that. But I think if a team had taken that strong of a stance, you would have seen, I think it would have been a whiplash situation, the same way you saw like Nike when they put out Kaepernick's ad, and all of a sudden people are burning New Balance shoes on the internet because they don't know the difference between Nike and New Balance. But also there was a moment of, this is going to ruin their stock price. But Nike is doing fine. They had a moment, and then they recovered, and then people realized, oh, it's not so bad, and they move on. And it would have changed what was normal in the league. And I think it would have been a signal to everyone that, you know, we're not going to let this idea of kneeling for a protest being anti-American gain footing, because that continues to this day. And it started with Kaepernick and the kneeling, like, oh, this is un-American for you to protest treatment of Black people. This is un-American. You're desecrating the flag and the national anthem and the troops. Like, none of that was ever true. But by staying silent, they allowed that narrative to gain a foothold. And I think it's still reverberating to this day. If there had been a team that said, you know what, that's trash, we don't believe that, this is it's an American right to protest injustice, and that's what we're doing. If you had ever seen an owner on the field take a knee with the team, that team would be immortalized. It would be a Jackie Robinson type moment, you know, but they missed their opportunity.
You know, speaking of Jackie Robinson, I want to go back several decades to the civil rights era, because this is something that players, our star players across all sports, used to do. I remember the photo of Ali and Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Bill Russell, with several other African-American players taking a stand and protesting the treatment of African-Americans at the time in this country. And that was in, I want to say, the early mid-'60s, where a lot of the leagues were still undergoing integration at that time. And you fast forward to now, to where there's a segment of the population that feels that, I hate to use the word entitlement here, but for lack of a better word here, that feel that you're being given all this money to play the game. Why things are so much better now than they were before. How do you address that contingent on a level to help them understand, or at least try to bring, I don't want to say bring the thinking around, but at least hopefully that they will open their minds to be receptive of what's going on, because a lot of people still believe, players should just play and don't realize that, these are human beings as well. These are people who, once they step off the field, have to go back to these lives that, that are being impacted by the what we consider the norms of society, whether positively or negatively.
What you're speaking to, and I'm going to say something that is going to be jarring, so bear with me. Thinking like that, someone who has an athletic career that is very lucrative, that they should just, shut up and dribble, or that they don't have a right to speak, is a vestige of white supremacy. And I'm explaining to you what I mean. So you just said it yourself a second ago. These people are human. To see someone as a performer, all you do is come out here and run this ball, and then you go away and entertain me. That's your job. I don't want to see anything else from you. It reduces them to two dimensions, and it completely strips away their humanity. You are just a football player, like any pixelated Tecmo Bowl, character. You're not real. How dare you have feelings, especially after we listen to this part, after we let you play this game. We let you into the league. There's a level of power dynamic there that is unspoken. We let you do this. How dare you protest anything because you've got it good? So shut up about your cousin, your sister, your child, your father, etc. We want to hear about all of that. You're just supposed to do this one thing that we like for you to do. I'm saying that's a lot. So I agree with you. Like, there is a humanity behind these people, and not being able to express, and again, I talk about this with corporations, not being able to express who you really are, and then being expected to come to work every day and just, quote unquote, do the job and be quiet is exhausting. Mentally and physically and psychologically, it takes a toll. And so to expect someone to do that is to tell them, again, to suffer in silence for my entertainment. And that's just not right.
On one of the most recent episodes of Hard Knocks, they're focused on the two teams in LA this season. And they really took the time to focus on what is happening right now in America today, and specifically what's happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And it does appear that the players, let me even go back a little bit more. I think football is one of those sports, and it's not even just football, but all sports really, where we've really seen a true blending of our society, where men don't see each other as people of color or of a different race. They see each other as true brothers on the football field. And yes, there are pockets where that is not the case. But I think from an overall standpoint, when those men get together in the locker room, they are what we are hoping all of society can become at some point in time, and hopefully sooner rather than later. Mm-hmm. On the most recent episode of Hard Knocks, these men, I think, finally came to an understanding that they have a ginormous platform where they can voice their concerns. And I really do believe that we're going to see a lot more protests in the NFL this season, more than just kneeling during the national anthem, where we may see the iconic fist raise during a touchdown celebration, where when they have an opportunity to speak with the media, they will be speaking specifically about social issues. And I think this is extremely important for us to get to that point where we can all finally I don't want to say get past racism, because that's not the right way to phrase that, but to end racism for sure. Yeah. But my question to you is, will we ever truly see the end of racism? Is that even something that can be accomplished? Not that we should ever stop trying to. I'm just wondering if it's a possibility.
That's what I've made some jaded statements in my life, like, you know what, if something happened and they got rid of all people of color, people would start to, the folks that were left would start to discriminate against, straight hair, curly hair, blue eyes, brown eyes, over 6 feet, under 6 feet. People are always going to have a desire to compare themselves to others and find other people lacking. It's a flaw in the human condition to want to be better than someone else. So I don't think we can ever completely eradicate prejudice, because it may not always be skin. If we get past that, like I said, it could be teeth. It could be, can you wink one eye? If you can't, one eye winkers are stupid. Like, we're going to come up with something to differentiate ourselves and want to be better than others. So managing that character flaw, managing that desire to compare yourself to others and find them lacking is what we really need to control long term. Right now, we're seeing it manifest in a very real and tangible way with people of color being discriminated against, not just in the United States, but it's global, it's worldwide. So I think once we get to a point where we can recognize that skin color, melanin amounts in your DNA don't make a difference, then we can move forward from this particular. And hopefully, as we learn to manage through this, the rest of the potential things we discriminate against each other for in the future will be less easier to overcome. Once you get good at something, a little practice, once you get good at something, it gets easier to do. So that's my hope, is that it's like being a cancer survivor. And I do not mean to offend anyone that is a cancer survivor by comparing these two, but it's the strongest comparison that I can come up with. When you have been through something where you've had to excise a piece of your body, either a mastectomy, a colonectomy, if you have had to go through something traumatic in order to make sure that you heal and live on, you are constantly, for the rest of your life, monitoring the situation to make sure it doesn't come back. You are eternally in remission, but you still continue to check. Make sure that if even one cell pops up on a biopsy or whatever, that it is immediately eradicated. You have to maintain a constant vigil for the rest of your life. And racism is a cancer. And so it's traumatic. What we're seeing now is this nationwide chemotherapy, if you will, where people are attacking in different spots and different places all over. If we are able to eradicate it, it doesn't mean it's going to go away forever. We have to maintain a constant vigil for the rest of eternity to make sure it doesn't rear its ugly head again.
James, let me just follow up real quick there, because I have another question related to that. And it regards to the media and how I feel the media at times wants to be an ally, but at the same time, the business of the media fights against that. And what I mean by that is, when we see protests on television, all we see are the clashes. We see the violence. The old phrase in media is, if it burns, it leads. If it bleeds, it leads. And so the media is not helping in this regard when we're looking at trying to find a way to fix the problems in America, because I don't believe that a violent protest is the way to fix what is happening amongst us as a people, as a society. We need to find a way to come together without being violent with each other. And to what you said before, I have joked a number of times on this podcast, the aliens need to come here sooner than later so that we can band together and fight against the aliens.
Yeah, you that's actually a very good point. if we all had a common enemy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, it could solve some stuff. I mean, we probably, half of us won't make it because if aliens make it here, they're clearly going to be technologically advanced. But anyway, back to your point. What I'd like to say to that is, if you think about, an article just came out the other day that said 93% of the interactions or the protests across the United States have been peaceful. 93%. And this isn't by like a total number of people, it's by a total number of events. So out of 100 events, 93 of them were just fine. And then 7 of them turned violent or had agitators there. And again, they're counting damage to property, vandalism, anything that got somebody arrested was what they're reporting on. And so 93% is an A in anybody's book, right? Even old school grading, that was an A. So I think to your point about, if it bleeds, it leads, that goes back to ad revenue, and it goes back to money, and it goes back to profits. We need something that is going to get people to click on the link, tune in to the station, etc. So we've got to get the most salacious article or headline that we can. I can't tell you how many times I have clicked on an article that had almost nothing to do with the clickbait title that it had. But most people nowadays, especially given the proliferation of social media, they're not reading articles. They're reading headlines. And the headlines say chaos is erupting across the United States. And what's really happening is out of 100 protests, 7 of them have vandalism or property damage associated with them. And God forbid someone actually gets hurt, then that's going to be the running story for an extended amount of time. And if nothing else happens, they run that story again and again until something else happens. And so you do build up this library in people's minds of all the different things they've seen to show how violent these protests are. When in actuality, that's not the case. But it's just like Chicago. People love to bring up Chicago when we talk about the history of violence towards Black people from law enforcement. But what about Chicago? They're killing each other. Chicago's not even in the top 10 most violent cities in the country anymore. They've done a lot of work to try and reduce the number of killings. They want to improve the community. They've introduced, school programs and youth programs and anti-gang programs, et cetera, to cut down on that violence. But, you hear 20 people died on the 4th of July in Chicago. Well, did you know that, and I'm making this part up, but did you know that more people died on the 4th of July at Albuquerque, New Mexico? Because Albuquerque, New Mexico is in the top 10 most violent cities in the country. But the statistics from those cities are shared because Chicago is the dog whistle, the hot button, the something people remember. It's in our minds. Chicago is violent. When in actuality, it's not the way it's portrayed. Ask anybody that's from there how much they've done to improve it. People talk about Black on Black crime. And it's interesting to me, and I know I'm on a tangent here, when the United States was trying to justify manifest destiny back in the 1700s, and they were pushing the First Nations people west. One of the reasons that they said it was okay to do was because these nations, they fight each other. They're always fighting and warring and battling and squabbling. And so who cares if we do it too? And so when I hear people say, why should we worry about the cops killing unarmed Black people because Black people kill Black people too, it strikes me as the same sort of logic, the same sort of rationale. But here's the thing. 87% of violence against Black people is committed by other Black people. That is true. 84% of the violence against white people is committed by other white people. 86% of the violence against Latinx people is committed by other Latinx people. And the reason for this is because you hit your neighbors. People fight and squabble with folks they know. And most of us have very homogeneous neighborhoods, friend circle, friendship circles, et cetera, families. And so if I punch James, that's Black on Black crime. But if you punch your brother, that's not white on white crime. Why is that not a phrase? And again, it doesn't sell. And so all of this goes back into what can we use to create something that people will click on to either confirm their already existing bias or to be led down this path of Black people are violent and they deserve what they get.
And James, this is my last question. Related to all of this, the state of Connecticut just recently announced that they are canceling high school football this season. And I know my son's football team and many other football teams are planning on a protest in Hartford. And my son was already talking about how he doesn't plan on associating with the kids that are going to throw rocks or break bottles or anything like that. Our kids are already learning poorly from the media that a protest means you go out and you break stuff and you do all stupid stuff and you get yourself arrested, instead of understanding that what a protest is you raising your voice and making yourself seen and heard so that the people that are making decisions, whether rightly or wrongly, understand that there's a differing point of view that is loud and should be heard. And it doesn't require the use of violence to do so. Now, I'm telling that message to my son, and hopefully anyone that's listening to this podcast takes that message and tells it to their children. But I know that there are a lot of other children that will be involved in this rally that won't get this message from their parents. And that's part of why I hope things like this type of conversation can go further in society and with more people in the media and with a bigger spotlight than just our little podcast.
No, I 100% agree with you on how the media is shaping all of this. And this isn't the first time. They did the same thing. And when I say they, I mean society, media, government factions, et cetera. During Nixon's years, when they were protesting the Vietnam War, there were plenty of Americans that went out to protest the Vietnam War. They were painted as tree-hugging hippies. That phrase still sticks with us to this day. They all smoke pot. They're all drug addicts and ne'er-do-wells, and they criminalized the people who were protesting as some sort of far left-wing, sound familiar, faction that was out to destroy and didn't support the troops, et cetera. And matter of fact, the idea of supporting the troops came to fruition during that time. Similarly, the Black Panthers, as a reaction to police violence in Oakland and in California, they created the Black Panthers were created out of that strife, and their whole point was, look, stay out of our community. We got this. We will police ourselves, so y'all don't need to come in here. But they did it using their lawful right to bear arms, and seeing a bunch of Black people with guns in the news and media frightened all of the United States. This is a terrible thing. They are terrorist organization. They are agitators. They are the most dangerous in America. And they ultimately were killed for it. But they really were trying to protect their own community. And you see the same thing happening now. You have allies who are protesting who are called Antifa. And most people don't even know what Antifa means because it's anti-fascism. And so if you don't like Antifa, you're basically tacitly allowing fascism. But anyway, most people are not Antifa. It's not like a thing. You know, people will say Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. It's a hashtag for the most part. You have a few organizations in different cities that have that as their title, you know, to try to fundraise for bail or, you know, for programs, et cetera. But by and large, it's not a national organization, not even a little bit. And to me, this shows you how history repeats itself, because we find ourselves once again in a moment where we have young people and very diverse groups who are saying enough is enough, and they're standing up. And there's this desire for the status quo to be maintained. There's this desire to criminalize them, either as agitators, Antifa. There's always a label, always some sort of name, and there's always whatever the label is a danger to quote unquote good Americans. And again, there's a level of identity politics played in there as well. So there's so much. There's so much to unpack in so much of this that we could talk about this until 2021, just on this podcast. But I agree with you. I would like to see it stretch beyond individual groups and go to becoming more and more of a national change. I think we have a moment in time here, just like we did in the 60s, where we can make lasting change. And protest is the way things have always changed in this country. Otherwise, if people don't know you're upset about it, then they can act like they don't know you're upset about it, right? and continue on doing what they're doing. And the other way that I think people can exercise their or show their discontent is exercising their right to vote. That's how you get people in office that agree with your particular politics. And if you protest and you don't vote, you are handicapping yourself. And that's something I definitely want to get out to everyone, as more and more I'm hearing like so many people, especially in the sports world, are not necessarily registered to vote or not voting. By all means, especially as you have this platform and you can reach so many people who might also not understand, lasting change comes through the very system that we're trying to dismantle. It's the only way to get things to be different is to change the laws. And the only way to change the laws is to change the lawmakers. And the only way to change the lawmakers is to vote. And it's not just president. We don't live in a monarchy. The president alone is a figurehead that can by all means incite people to do different things. But the president is not putting laws on the books in your state. Your state legislature is, your DA, your sheriff, your mayor, your city council, your school board. Those are the people that we need to pay attention to and vote for, because those are the ones that are either maintaining or changing the status quo in your community. So read the whole ballot, people. That would be one of the things I want to get across.
I have two final questions. The first, and I'm going to encompass a lot here because of what we've already talked about. And Jay mentioned the Hard Knocks episode, in which I believe the clip that's pretty much been going around, especially that I've seen on NFL Network, is the clip in the Rams, I want to say receivers room or DB's room, where it was 5 young black players. And I guess the senior member of the group is standing in front and telling them how much they have a platform, and correlating that more or less to what the NBA players recently did as far as taking a stand and basically saying we're not playing these playoff games tonight, which then rolled over to the WNBA. They pretty much followed suit as well, and they didn't play any games that night. And Jay and I, we agree probably from different perspectives as far as how that all played out as far as its impact, in that it did force the NBA to probably look inward and do more socially than what they have been doing. And I get that in this time of, a pandemic, people want to say, well, there are other things going on, but let's just take, a few minutes to address this elephant in the room that has been around for decades, if not centuries, and the power that those NBA players have and what the NFL players are, I won't say slowly, but are coming around to seeing that they have this impact, that they can, their voices are being heard or can be heard if they speak up and say something or do something that garners the attention that will either provoke conversation, if not change, from the cities they play in or the team management. How do you feel more players across any league can use this platform in a way that, they don't feel like they're alienating a fan base, but at the same time, they want to do or say something without conveying the wrong message as far as trying to help social justice?
It's interesting, the phrase, alienate the fan base. Again, it goes back to, what are my fans wanting me to do? If I see these things and it's in my heart, it's in my soul to speak out about them, and my fans who purport to love me want me to be quiet about it because it makes them uncomfortable, they're asking a whole lot. And I think people don't necessarily understand that. So, if you have something, if you feel convicted, as we say in church, if you feel convicted to do something, to stand up for what you think is right, to let everyone know this is your stance on a particular topic, then you should do it. And if it alienates your fan base, that tells you something about how they really feel about you. Are they seeing you as a human being that has concerns, et cetera, or are you just a two-dimensional figurehead, that can be replaced with an episode of, a version of Madden 2021? What do you really want? And I think when we talk about, no change comes without sacrifice, that's part of the sacrifice. And there may be people who are out of favor. Let's not forget how Muhammad Ali was really treated when he protested the Vietnam War, and all the things that he said. He was a pariah. They stripped him of all his titles. Martin Luther King was in jail multiple times. For people who forget that all his nonviolent protests all ended with him going to jail. So, the idea, some people have a romanticized idea of what the 60s was like. He was on the FBI's most wanted list. He was, quote unquote, the most dangerous man in America. So there's always this level of resistance to change. And it's going to be on an individual basis. Like, do you care enough about this to risk anything, or is it something, I put it this way, some people say, some folks will kill for a chance at something else. Some people will die for, doing something that's right. What are you willing to sacrifice? And I'm absolutely not encouraging people just to take out to the streets and start killing and dying, but, are you willing to sacrifice your career? Look at Colin Kaepernick. I mean, at the same time, we talked about that cushion before. You ain't hungry, but you also not pulling in, multi-million-dollar contracts anymore if you get cut from a team. But if you get cut for what you stood for, let's think about John Carlos and Tommy from the 1960s Olympics, where when they did that iconic fist raise, it ruined their career. Ruined. Forever. But they made their mark in history. And now, people see them as heroes, but at the time they were vilified, as was the Australian guy who was also on the board with them. He was vilified for not stepping away, for standing in solidarity with them. He was being an ally before we knew what an ally was. So there can be real consequences, but it just, to me, it comes down to, what matters most to you individually, as a group, as a company, as a organization, as a franchise. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want people to know that you did?
Joy, I think you put my point that I've been trying to make with James about about them forfeiting their games, quote unquote forfeiting. The message that gets delivered when the games just get rescheduled gets watered down because there was no real loss. They may have been willing to lose a game, but they didn't actually end up losing a game, and they weren't the NBA wasn't going to allow them to lose a game in that particular instance. And that was my only point to that is, if you're going to walk away and take the forfeit, then take the L, then show me how much it really means to you, and take the loss that goes along with not participating in the game. Don't get paid for walking away from that particular game. Show how much it really means to you and actually lose something to make your statement that much more loud so that I actually hear it. I don't see any impact from what they did other than what you said. It got replaced with Madden 2021 or Netflix or something else that was on TV that night. That's been my only point to what the NBA players decided to do, and that ultimately trickled through all the other sports in that particular day.
I think you make a good point about that. Like, what is the lasting impact of that? And, people will say, well, if they decide never to play again, they'll just replace them with other players. That's true. You can replace them with other players, but, have you worked them out? Do you know anything about them? They don't have a fan base. They're all nobodies, so that will absolutely affect the league if everyone just decided we're not playing anymore or we won't play until this need is met, or this, this request for support or recognition or, commitment to change, et cetera, is met. We're not playing another game until then. You could say that, ultimately, if that did happen, they could postpone stuff indefinitely. And, eventually everybody's going to, if things ever get settled, they're going to come back. But I do think that's the point, is if you want to really affect change in that way, I think it was a good attempt. I understood what they were going for. I commend them for wanting to do that. But ultimately, all of the bosses got together like, okay, so let's just postpone it and we'll do it tomorrow. And there was kind of like a moment of, oh, well, okay. I don't think they went into it thinking that it was a performative sacrifice, like just on paper only. I think they went into it thinking, we're not playing. And we're going to tell you we're not playing. And then when everything got rescheduled, they didn't have like a backup plan for it. Because, again, as you try to figure out how you want to take a stand, you're going to stumble. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do something that maybe wasn't completely well thought out, because all that stuff happened in the moment. But if they decide, we are striking until we see X, Y, Z, and nobody's playing, and that would take everyone on the team to agree to that, that could make some lasting change. We are striking until we see this much money dedicated to lobbying for police reform at this level. We're going to strike until we see, I don't know, Breonna Taylor's killers arrested, even though that's not how that works. But still, what is their goal? And I think as standing in solidarity, it was almost like a moment of silence, for the violence in Kenosha. Like, we're going to take this moment and not play, but then things do resume. And so, I think there's more they could do. I'd be interested to see how that all plays out in the NBA and the NFL and the NHL and the Major League Baseball. Like, I want to see what everybody has to say, about what type of things they want to either tacitly support or adamantly reject, So there's no more standing on the sidelines. Everybody's got to get in this game one way or the other.
All right, Joy, my last question here. You mentioned the willingness to change as far as people switching their mindsets, as far as accepting the reality that's before them. On this podcast, a number of times, I have been ultra critical of Drew Brees, who, said initially when Kaepernick took a knee, I don't agree with disrespecting the flag, and even earlier this year said the same thing and doubled down on those comments from 4 years ago, even going so far as to point out how his father served in World War II, only for his teammates on Twitter to respond to a CNN video, with wrong move, not what you want to do, completely missing the point, to where he had a conversation with his new teammate, Malcolm Jenkins, who I've been adamantly supportive of through all of his reform while he was in Philadelphia, reform programs, even helping found the Players Coalition, a group of NFL players who are seeking social justice reforms in local law enforcement in their team cities. And Jenkins had, I don't know how long the conversation was, but it obviously hit on some accord, because you do, like Drew Brees, have this contingent of American society who believe that, well, you're disrespecting my father or my grandfather's memory / legacy who fought in World War II. I won't allow you to do that. But totally discounting those who are protesting, who also had relatives, and I feel that's a part of this conversation that gets lost, where, it's almost a selfish focus. My dad, my grandpa did this, and you're disrespecting them, but not taking into account of the other person that you're speaking to. You don't know if their dad or grandfather also served in World War II. And Malcolm Jenkins, to his point, was telling Drew Brees that, his relatives, his uncles, served in World War II as well, but yet that same thing that they were fighting against, as far as Nazi Germany, these African-American troops had to deal with the same segregation and ridicule from the own servicemen they were working with overseas. and then come back to face more racism when the war was done. How do you address those people with that mindset, that Drew Brees, I will say, formerly had, because I do believe that he is slowly going through a process of realizing how much his words have impacted others. How do you address those people who still feel in some way, my ancestors, X, Y, Z, you should respect them because of you have these rights now, but totally discounting the fact that America is basically fighting a war on two fronts, and in this era they want to glorify so much.
People forget the first person to lose their life for the idea of America was a black man.
Right.
So Crispus Attucks. And so, we have been here. When I say we collectively, I mean, black people in the United States or in, the colonies at the time. We have been here fighting for the idea of America and fighting for, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the American way, et cetera. Since then, in the War of 1812, the Spanish-American War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, North Korea War, we've been there the entire time. But again, going back to media, suppression of history and historical facts, the whitewashing of history to some extent, any propaganda piece that you see from World War I, World War II is white soldiers. Any information that you hear about heroes is white heroes. We forget the Tuskegee Airmen. We forget the Harlem Hellfighters of World War I. There was a whole brouhaha over Battlefield, which is a video game, because they put a black guy on the front for a World War I cover. And people screamed bloody murder because they thought, why are you putting black people in World War I? They weren't there. And the story was about the Harlem Hellfighters of World War I. They were such a strong unit that the Germans and the French and everyone else recognized them as being formidable, as being some of the strongest soldiers of their time. They got awards and medals from the UK and from France, and they came home to racism. Whites only. Get out of here. No rights, etc. So, when you have that kind of conversation with someone who says you're disrespecting the troops are just as diverse. And I talk to people that will say, I'm a Marine or I'm in the Navy and we don't see color and he's my brother, et cetera, et cetera. If he's your brother, stand up for him off base. When you walk around in the world, there's been some cases that we've seen where police brutality is extended to veterans. Where are the veterans? Where are the rest of the military speaking up for them? And I do see people who have military backgrounds saying the protests, that they support them because this is what they're fighting for, is the right to speak your mind, to protest, to say that something isn't fair, and to want to be better. Just because I love America, and I do, doesn't mean I don't see where we can be better. That I want a better America for my children, if I ever had any, hypothetically. Especially around this idea of, disrespecting the flag, that's a person-to-person conversation. And unfortunately, when people saw that, Drew Brees was changing his stance, or after learning more information, understanding how it wasn't about what he thought it was about, there's some people's response, oh, now he's been indoctrinated, he's drinking the Kool-Aid. No, he's been opened up. He's opening his eyes to a different perspective and understanding that somebody else's reality is completely different. And there's merit to the idea that there is inequality in the United States that needs to be addressed. Just because I want the country to do better doesn't mean I'm disrespecting the people who fight for it. And I think that's the message that more people need to understand. And again, you can't change people. They have to want to change. And there are some people who are going to have, a rejection of all of this. Nathan Rustin said there is prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance. I don't want to know. I don't care about what you're trying to tell me because I want to stick with my status quo. That's where the violence comes into it. It's a rejection of a different set of information that is so strong, it resorts to violence. That's when you get cities burned down. And that's when you get, there were so many riots between like 1850 and 1964 where black communities were burned out. Tulsa is not the only one. Rosewood is not the only one. There are over 30 where just because Black people had a home and a business, it was so against the idea in so many white Americans' minds that they are supposed to be subhuman and less than and not have nice things, that they burned their nice things. And it happened over and over again. And again, it was a violent rejection of seeing them as equal. And so now, as we have integrated societies and, people recognize that a Black person can be president, although that's a whole nother story, but, or, have positions of power, you see people violently resisting that change in the power structure. And it doesn't take away any benefits from anyone who already has them. It's just extending that same benefit to other people. It's not like pie. There can be love for everybody. It's like a hug. The more you give, the more you get. And so I hope more people get into that mindset. And again, I encourage everyone in the NFL to listen to me, and other people who have expertise in this, because every Black person is not a diversity expert. Some of them, we all were raised in the same public education system, so most Black people don't know a lot of stuff either. But talk to folks who, spend a Saturday listening to Jane Elliott on YouTube. Google her and just listen to all of her speeches, interviews, etc., and it might give you, she's my personal hero. It might give you a different perspective.
Joy, the two things. One, that's the second time that you said that's another story, and I really want to listen to those other stories that you have, and that's why I was laughing. And two, listen. I think that's a very key word that doesn't get said enough out of everybody. That one side will say something and then they don't listen to the response from the other side. Listening, I think, is so important to be done during this time. Listen, don't speak, listen. And when you listen, you do get that other perspective and you do understand where the other person is coming from. And when that other person is coming from a point of miseducation or from a point of undereducation, that's the time that you can then bring them the correct perspective, bring them the facts of the situation, and help them understand why their belief that they believe so strongly, because that is what they've been taught and that is what they've learned, is wrong, because what they were taught and what they have learned was wrong from the get-go.
Right. And so one of the things that I challenge people, because of course, naturally in my line of work, I run into people who don't want to hear anything I have to say. And one of the things that I challenge them with is like, okay, so they'll say, well, I just want to listen. I just want to hear this. Well, I just want to, okay, do you want to listen or do you want to win? Because you cannot fully absorb what I'm telling you if you're waiting on your chance to speak and waiting on a chance to get a gotcha moment or a rebuttal, et cetera. Just listen. Listen to me and I will listen to you. I'll even let you go first. Tell me everything you want to tell me. And then I'm going to tell you everything I want to tell you, and we'll see where we fall out. But if you just want to win, then we're not going to have a conversation. We're going to have a battle.
Joy, thank you so much for your time. I think you said it, and we said it even before we did this particular podcast, that we could literally do a year-long episode on this topic and still not cover everything that needs to be covered and talk about everything that needs to be talked about. But where can people listen to you more? Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
You can find me at my website for my company is www.newheightsawait.com. And I'm also on, actually I have a YouTube channel. It's called A Moment of Joy with Joy Stevens. It's free coaching advice to people. But newheightsawait.com is my website.
Joy, I do thank you for coming on. Great conversation. I know we'll be talking more offline as, these things go forward. And I just appreciate everything that you said today.
Again, thank you guys for having me. This is a passion of mine, obviously. And so I appreciate the chance to reach a bigger audience with the type of discussions that I hope everybody wants to have.
James, that was really great. Thanks so much for introducing me and everyone else to Joy. I think this is, like we said, this is a conversation that could go on forever.
Absolutely. And, I hope everyone takes the time to actually reflect and have an open mind as far as conversations, like Joy said, going further into your discussions with people as far as social justice and social reform. It's not a bad thing for everyone, regardless of sex, race, religion, orientation, to be treated equally and fairly. It doesn't impact you negatively in any way to have a level playing field. Yes, inherently you're going to have some advantages because of intelligence or physical conditioning, but just because you are A as opposed to B doesn't make you better than someone else, and I just hope that people just become more accepting and open about that going forward. My right to walk down the street unencumbered by police for whatever reason should not infringe upon, should not be a detriment to my existence, in the same way that you can walk down the street unencumbered. So I just want people, like I said, just have an open mind and just be willing to listen, like you said, not overtalk someone, not force your point, but actually listen to other people who have differing perspectives than you do.
Pod, who's this Pod character? I thought we said that he tagged out of
Jay,
this particular show at the beginning of the episode.
Habit forming. So many years. It
really is, not to get sidetracked, but it really is odd for me to try and refer to Pod Vader in the third person because he really is the same. But in any case, back to the point at hand. The other superfans would gladly be involved in this particular conversation. The problem there is it's a lot easier for James and I to coordinate our schedule than for me to coordinate the schedule with all of the superfans at the same time. And that is the only reason why the other superfans are not involved in this particular conversation today. Otherwise, I would love to have a roundtable conversation with everyone so that we can listen to everyone and hear everyone else's point of view. And I think Neil brings a very distinct perspective, being a foreigner, a man from Scotland, right. So that we can get that perspective from what does it look like from the outside looking in at America at this particular point in time. And obviously how his perspectives have been skewed by the way the media portrays that particular story is also very interesting.
True
but
indeed.
James, I think I'm not 100% sure how I want to end this particular podcast, and I really don't want it to end. But what I do want to say is this: there were less commercials in this particular episode than what you will typically hear on Next Fan Up. And that was more to allow the conversation to breathe and be portrayed without any interruption. However, for the commercials that were in this particular episode, the money that we earn from that for this episode will be donated to a charity at a later date. And James will let me know what that charity is at that time. And what we want to have happen with this particular episode is for everyone out there to understand that, one, what the media tells you isn't always in your best interests. And two, that the conversation needs to be ongoing, that conversations like this need to happen on a more frequent basis than what they do. And even myself, who made sure that this episode happened today, so because we're about to get into a football season and we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty of the NFL, the way that we do, we get into the weeds of gameplay and get distracted by the game that we all love instead of talking about this particular issue. I need to make sure that we make time for that when the time needs to happen. And so please do what you can to listen to your fellow brother and sister and be there for everyone when you need right now is we're all hurting. Everyone is hurting. That's the reason why we have the issue today is everyone is hurting, not just Black people, not just white people, not just Latino. Everyone is hurting. And we all need to come together and share our pain and understand our pain and put that pain behind us so that we can heal together. And that's what I'm really hoping that this kind of conversation can help spark, is that healing together.
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. And, you know, in times like this, and just respect each other. And nothing is more poignant as far as how I can encapsulate how much we need to embrace each other right now, more so than the final speech given at the end of Black Panther by Chadwick Boseman. We are all part of the same tribe. And, you know, that entire speech he gave at the end of that movie is so poignant and relevant to what's going on in the world today. I think more people need to really go back and evaluate and listen to what he's saying in that moment, as far as how we as a world, not just this nation, need to respect each other and just, like you said, listen. Because we're all fighting the same struggles. We're all fighting for the same things, and there's no reason that us getting those things, as far as social equality goes, should cost another their life or any type of harm.
I think I will leave it with this. You know, we'll obviously get back to football later this week. I'm not going to take the time to promote all of the things that we have going on this particular week, but there's a time for football and there's a time to embrace one another. And I want to encourage you all out there to take this time to embrace your fellow brother and sister. Let them know that you love them and help them heal through their pain and end this ridiculous suffering that has gone on for far too long. That should never have happened in the first place. That shouldn't be happening in the year 2020. It has to stop. We need it to stop, and we need to start healing. And that happens with love. And I'm just going to end this by saying I love you and I love you all. And yeah, that's all I have is love for everyone. I'm not a poet, James. I'm definitely not a poet.
It's okay, man. It's okay.